Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's wonderful to be able to do something that's links my interests in terms of the academic part and the more cultural, creative part. We've had conversations before this with Linn and I, and Sean's been involved, and I think this promises to be a very fascinating kind of crossing various boundary kind of screen side talk instead of fireside chat. Yeah, so it was already introduced that I like to look at digital inequalities, but I think I want to give the word or the screen first to Linn to tell us a little bit more about your work and how you see that it's related to this topic that we're talking about: identity, data, what it means to be human in the digital space, and I'll jump in and we'll see if there's any questions as we go along. But I think your work's fascinating, and I would love to hear a little bit more about it and for other people to hear. So go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you all for joining this. We are here now apparently to talk about data ethics. Before this, I didn't know that my work was so much related to this. But I think, so I've been working on kind of like the way we as humans engage with digital space for several years now, and also starting to do research on that topic this September. And I think that we're entering this new sort of form of existence that is very much not separated, but like very much merging digital and physical space. And I've been trying to examine that with my artistic practice in the past few years. So like thinking about how we build and shape our identity and identities in digital space. And I've been looking at tools that we use, how we navigate digital space, and how we kind of keep up our identities in that new living environment of ours.
Yeah.
It
would be great if you could show us something, to get like a feeling, because you're a very visual artist, right? It would be lovely to see. Maybe you can give us a glimpse.
I've prepared two things that I want to share with you. So I'm going to start my screen now. Start sharing my screen now. Let's see how that works. It works. That's great. Okay. So I'm starting with a video work of mine that I did a year and a half ago, where I created a virtual forest inside of a 3D model. I'm just gonna let the video kind of run. So the way it works is that I had this 3D model of a tree, and then I copied this and other models of trees over and over again until I had this virtual forest. This video is a screen recording, so it's like my movement inside of that 3D model. And it's pretty much about this, how it creates this viewer experience of getting deeper and deeper inside the forest, but then you ultimately reach like a glitch of that tree, or a glitch of all the trees. And in that work, I was kind of, it was like a contemplation about how we engage with nature or with landscape nowadays. So for instance, for me personally, I grew up in an urban environment in a city. I am very much used to orientating and navigating urban environments, but to the contrary, I can't really orientate in a forest, for instance. For me, it's terrifying. So in this work, I was I was trying to contemplate about how we get lost in these sort of spaces, and then how to recreate that in a virtual space that it's like virtual space is much more comfortable for me to move in, weirdly so. Yeah, so that was about it.
So you created like an online space representing an offline space that you're uncomfortable in, and it's still quite an uncomfortable experience to kind of look at it. You really feel like you're getting lost. You know, you get your sensation of being lost in a kind of non-virtual forest, but you're creating it in an environment that you are, you know, I think you describe on your profile somewhere, like you like live in the cloud, right, in the digital cloud.
Exactly. I think it's more, I mean, I'm saying it's a contemplation because it doesn't really solve the problem. It's more like in the attempt, like in the act of recreating that, it's like a scientific method of understanding what a forest is. And to me, for instance, if I go into a forest, it's like this, everything looks the same. I mean, I'm just generalizing. I know that I'm generalizing, but it's just this very basic thought of disorientation, of getting lost. It could be anything, could be metaphor for like all kinds of things, but it's just this thought that like you enter a space and everything looks the same, and then and I'm just like, I mean, I'm like artificially recreating that by, of course, using like the same models, the same trees over and over again. But it's just, yeah, it's just a way of like by creating it, I'm trying to understand how a forest works in a sense, or how it doesn't work for me.
It's very interesting you're trying to do that in a digital space, you know, a space that you can construct and design and control to a certain extent. And, you know, other people might say, like, you go into a forest, you know, to study a forest. And it's very interesting for me to see you use the tools that you are in control of and familiar with to create this kind of digital space to explore these aspects.
Like I was told to go into a forest. But I thought it was a bizarre thought, and yeah, no, I don't know. I think yeah, I don't know. I think that just for me, it's like sometimes, I mean, like if you use language, for instance, to like put things into words so you can better understand them, and there was an experience that I had during an artist residency in south of France, walking through a forest and getting lost in that forest for like 6 hours. And then and it's kind of based off of that experience that you, yeah, just like, I mean, in that situation of being inside of the forest, I wasn't able to like get out. I wasn't able to read how, like, what the direction was or whatever. So, I mean, out of the experience of being in the forest life, kind of like in real life, IRL, it didn't really help me. So I thought, what is the experience that I have with landscape, with a very classical landscape, especially in the tradition of photography. I'm very much coming from a traditional education of photography. I studied that, and I think landscape photography, I mean, it's all about this like glorifying, elevating landscape in that, yeah, I don't know, in that sense.
It's interesting, I think, because in some of the language that you use is language that I hear a lot from people that participate in my research, who are very uncomfortable in digital environments, right? They feel like you mentioned something like, I was put there, you know, I was made to go to a forest. These are things that we hear a lot from people who are standing kind of at the margins of the digital aspects of our society, where they say, like, I have no choice. Somebody tells me I have to do this. Somebody tells me it's this fantastic world where I'm going to, you know, encounter all these magical experiences, and they don't feel it like that. They feel like they get lost. They don't understand how to navigate through these kind of digital spaces. They don't, you know, they can't read, let's say, the clues to where to go to reach a certain destination, or, you know, they might stand in front of a very whatever special tree or a very special element of that forest, in this case in the digital world, and they for them it's meaningless in a way, because they don't, they don't have a context in which that actually has meaning. So I think that's, it's really like your description of how you talk about your sensation of being in that kind of offline forest is kind of reflects a lot of the kind of language that I hear from some of the people that I do research with, who, when I talk about digital inequalities in my work, I'm not so much talking really about people who are outside of the digital space. We can talk about that maybe in a minute, about if that's actually possible in today's society to be completely outside of the digital space. So for me, it's not so much about access, but it's about people's feelings and experiences of alienation when they come into environments that are designed by other people, that people really understand from their perspective, their aesthetic values, their social values, and other people come into those spaces and they feel like they're not made for me. I haven't grown up in this environment. This is not an environment that speaks a language that I understand and where I feel comfortable in. So for me, it's really interesting, like, this kind of these experiences in the
about connection, I think, or and I think landscape. I was using this, like the forest, or like working about that for some time, because I think that nature or landscapes, they have this like very, very long tradition of being like a symbol for human ways to reconnect with things, like with their emotions, with with like a physical space. And at the same time, I think that like this experience of alienation, in some sort of emotional sense, is very strong today on many, many levels, of course, and especially with digital space, that it's very much like very ambivalent between like people, or I don't know, like as I say, like I feel more connected or more comfortable in a digital virtual environment than I feel in that landscape or natural environment. But I think of course I know that like there's like a big, it's like very different and very difficult to, you can't generalize that in
no. Yeah, and I think it's also, it's about, what does it mean to be human, or what's these kind of emotions, or these kinds of feeling of comfort and feeling part of a bigger whole, right? It's a social thing, feeling human. It's not me as an individual, although it's an embodied experience, but it's also an experience of feeling connected to other people and share a certain humanity. And I think that's something that, and if you have a different understanding of humanity, or you are in a similar situation, let's say in the digital space, if we refer to my research, where what we're finding is that people can have very similar, objectively from the outside, very similar experiences, where everybody should say, okay, well, that's a great experience, or that's something that, you should really benefit from. But then from the perspective of the person who's entering into that experience, it can have a very different meaning, feeling, emotions, and so it's kind of hard to disconnect that, right? As what is human, it's not that separate from the digital, because all our kind of experiences that come from outside that space influence that. Yeah,
very much central to my work is that thought of that. Or like opposing that common hypothesis that digital space is very much separated from the human, and everything that it means to be human. But I think that digital space is just, it's part of our reality nowadays, and also social media. Like it's not just social media, but it's also like all those interfaces, the way we move, like we're literally moving, like on our phone, we're like scrolling, we're wiping, like it's some sort of movement. We're navigating within that interface, and I think that it's a different way of navigation, of course, but still it's resonating with a lot of things that we know and that we've learned of how to navigate space.
And these spaces are built by humans as well. The digital spaces, this discussion that we were having before this event, is that, digital spaces don't come out of nowhere, right? They come out of, humans in a way, even if there's an algorithm in between, there's a certain, it's not like at a certain point, a human has started this with certain ideas and certain intentions, and the algorithm gets trained to do certain things, or certain things are marked as success and other as failure. So they're trained not to go down that route again. I've been having a half eye on the chat, and there was like this kind of question about whether digital space is able to Laura Kolker things like to replace sensual experiences, or and then Jane Vincent was asking, is this like, and I'm sure she's referring to this particular forced work that you've just shown us, but whether it's visual only or other senses. And I think as we're like, this is again about what is the sensual, what is the senses that we're talking about, and I was thinking about that as I was setting up for this meeting. I can maybe I'll just kick you off 1 second, Lynn, and to show one picture that I took of the space that I was in.
No, you can do that.
Yeah. So we'll come back. You can show some other work, but like this is kind of this is what's right next to my laptop at the moment, and you can see some of my roots. I guess you can kind of probably guess where I live in London by the flyer from Notting Hill, and or close by at least, and my Dutch heritage in this little bit that's it's like a thing to carry plates around. But I was thinking about, I like what of these experiences that we have been having, and especially in these times, we can't avoid when we talk about the digital time, talk about COVID times, but what can be replaced or what cannot be replaced by this kind of digital, and people, my neighbors and friends, have been very trying to engage with, for example, the Notting Hill Carnival, because the Notting Hill Carnival, it's not about the music, really. Well, it is also about the music, but it's about that kind of visceral experience of being in the crowd and the craziness and the sweat and the smells and the, that sensual experience. And the question is if that needs to be kind of directly represented in this digital space, or if we can evoke those experiences by creating digital spaces that allow us to experience some of these, some of the things that we have in our memory, right, in a sensual memory. So people who have been in a non-virtual forest might recollect smells or the sounds or things like that, while other people might not. And I think when we talk about digital spaces, that's what we often forget, right? That we not only are these made by humans, but we come in with a certain baggage on which we can build. To, if I look at your work of art of the virtual forest, or if I go to this virtual Notting Hill Carnival thing, it will be a very different experience for me than for somebody who's never been there, because I will have all kinds of sensory experiences that the people who haven't been in these things won't have. They will have very different experience. So I think this is, and we talk about inequalities because, that's my work. Then we can see that, like this is often something that's not taken into consideration, that people have hard times interacting and engaging, not just with others, but with digital environments themselves, because they can't put it into the context of their lives. It doesn't have that, kind of meaningful expression beyond something that somebody's created, who's created in their own image in a way, he created it in their kind of from their perspective. And so we talk a lot about people's digital skills and about, are you able to push like buttons or technical, like more technical aspects of it? Are you able to, use the right keywords or recognize fake information? But actually when we talk to people who feel like they're being left out in the digital world, they often talk about other things. When they talk about the frustration, it's like, I just don't get what I'm supposed to do here. I don't get, this is not made for me, or this is not me. And so I think, when I was looking through the work that you've done, that's really kind of interesting. If you see, you gave me a little preview of some of the things that will be in your book, which I want you to plug. So let's do that, make sure. Where you like counterposition, you in different spaces or different digital spaces, you as part of the digital, rather than seeing it as something that you're entering into. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, about how that's come to be.
Absolutely. I'm gonna share my screen again. Share.
Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so I've made these, like, this is like a kind of a sketch thing. It's not a like a finished body of work, but I've been doing these yeah, I mean, like, coming from this landscape kind of thing that I've been doing, which is also like recreating something that we know, like we know landscape. We are yeah, it's very much, we're coming from some certain tradition of landscape, viewing landscape, looking at landscape and everything. And so we do know that. But at the same time, it's still, I think what this is very much about, like our relationship to digital space is a lot about how we like not try to recreate something that we know, but like we're entering, or we're part of something that is entirely new, that we don't know, that didn't exist before or hasn't existed before. Yeah, it's like in some, like on some levels it's an entirely new experience, and not just like resonating with things that we know, like as I said before, with like like tools that we use to navigate space or whatever. So here I was like, I mean, it's very, very much of a sketch, and it's a little bit hilarious too. I mean, it's not, I mean, I'm not taking this, I don't know. It's a little bit funny. So I'm creating these landscapes sort of with myself that I'm then moving in. And as you can see, for instance, in this one, it's a bit like the one with the forest. So instead of a forest, I have like layers of it's very, yeah, very much like layers of myself as some sort of landscape, like a facescape, or I don't know, and then just moving in that. And it's, I think it's, yeah, it's just like, I don't know, like things that you try to like, where you try to visualize like a certain feeling of like merging into this, or being part of that, or what does it even mean to be in like this 3D space that also is the digital space. It's a 3D space. We move, I always feel like I'm moving in like an actual space that has a depth that I can go into. It's not just like a surface. And this is just like scribbles that I made
Yeah.
that had to do with this sort of feeling.
So it seems to me like there's almost like this spectrum, you know, again, if I think about it, like when we think about identity and belonging, you know, in spaces, and in this case, in a digital space, where you have certain people who are real visitors or are standing at the door looking in and trying to figure out what it is that they're seeing or what other people are doing, and kind of, you know, feel it kind of removed. And then there's people who navigate these spaces quite comfortably, spaces made by other people. You know, they're opening doors, they're sitting down. It's not, they don't have to think about what they're doing, right? They can sit in that. And then this is almost where you're pushing yourself, is almost to the other end of it, to kind of really think outside the box in terms of I am this space in a way, yeah, you know, like, or the space is me. And I'm recreating that, which is really, I'm guessing that's quite hard to do, because, you know, you are also a physical person with your, you know, kind of non-virtual aspects of your life. And I just wonder if you know, if you find that that's something that you keep coming back to, or are you now at a point where you kind of, when you're in these kind of flows of creating these spaces, where do you really lose kind of that sense of the more physical aspect of your being?
No, I mean, I still feel like a human being with a body. I get reminded of that every day. It's annoying, but it's there. No, I'm joking. It's great. Of course, I mean, I think it's very much about this, like accepting that it's both, and it can't, I mean, it, from now on, it will never be just one, or maybe in some distant future, it will be just the virtual. I don't know, but I hope not, to be honest, but you never know. but it's both right now. Even if you kind of if you're like withdrawing from the internet as this thing, then you're still, it's still there. It's always you, me, and the internet. It will never be I don't know. I don't know, maybe, but it's not. It's there, and we can like ignore it, but it's still there. And I think it's great. I mean, I think it's a great kind of I don't know. It's a tension. It's interesting. It's actually interesting to translate things that we know into digital space, but it's also interesting to find out what else is there to experience that we wouldn't be able to experience otherwise. And I mean, I'm always saying, for instance, like I know many, like I'm on my phone a lot. Friends, for instance, would tell me, or my family would tell me, yeah, you're disconnected, you're on your phone all the time. But the thing is, I think there's a different level to that, because it's not just about social media, but I think that being in digital space is just like, it's like looking out of the window in a sense. It's like you are seeing like things, spaces, content that is related to you or not, and you can relate yourself to what you're seeing in the same way as you can relate yourself, or you can relate to things that you see when you are outside, or in like a social environment, when you're meeting friends, or when you're meeting strangers, or when you're on the street or on the train or whatever. And I think it's always this, it's just another layer of reality that we have to position ourselves to, in a sense. Like we have to be there, we have to be something, and think about what we want to see, what we want to be, or what, like, I don't know.
It creates this kind of digital spaces do create. I think two of the things that I thought were really interesting about what you were just saying is that kind of this kind of intuitive idea that, you know, if you're in the digital, you're not in the other space, right? That somehow the digital is a separate thing, which is something that we see huge differences in our research depending on who you're talking to what extent that's the case. For some people, the digital is really a different space, and they go into it and they come out of it, and then for others, there's like a seamless transition. And sometimes people think this is mostly young people, but actually it's not. You know, it's a slightly generational thing, because you've grown up in digital environments and these ecologies in which the digital is always present. So I think that's interesting, because that dichotomy doesn't exist for everybody, but it is a problem for, you know, if kind of the spaces are designed by people who have that seamless transition, or who feel like it's part of it, and who are connecting in a physical space through devices with other physical spaces, or with other human beings and other relationships. If they are designing these spaces, then what does that mean for the people who kind of aren't as embedded in that, because they might not be able to get some of those experiences. And I think the point you were making about this digital space, like making you very aware of your actions in a way, you know, like even intuitively, you make certain decisions, but then you have to reflect, especially as an artist, I guess you have to reflect on why you're doing certain things. And some of the stuff that we're looking at now, because, for example, in my field of research and digital inequalities research, people always look at the people who are being left out, and what we can do to make them, draw them in, right? And to give them skills training, or to whatever, give them better connectivity or something like that. And it's very often the emphasis on interventions or policies with the people who are, let's call them, at the margins or less comfortable. But actually, like, what we're starting to realize more and more, that the reason that some people are comfortable and not comfortable is because the people who are using these digital spaces intensively are not aware that every step they make, every thing they click, every decision they make in terms of to go to a page or not to page, to post something or not to post, right? Like in a kind of modern Shakespearean version, to post or not to post. That all of that has an effect on everybody who comes after you. Yeah, if you decide to click on a link and not to click on a link, or to spend more time on a page or not to spend so much time on a page, that means that anybody who comes after you is going to have the options limited, because the algorithms learn, and they learn that people prefer this, so we're going to present this in a bigger kind of more visible space to create this kind of personalization. And that means that the people who are very intensive users of these technologies and who are creating these kinds of spaces are creating a world that by design will reflect more and more of their choices, and that people who come after or who are not as intensive users are not able to do that. And so, like, in the work that we're doing, we're actually kind of starting to put more and more emphasis on making people aware that everything, we talk a lot about our digital footsteps and leaving traces. And you are doing that in your work in a very specific, explicit way, right? I think, like, okay, what happens? Like, who am I? How is who I am kind of, would that reflect in a digital space? What if I change things? So, yeah, and I can imagine that for some people coming into your space, it could be a very comfortable experience, and for others it might be a bit more like disorienting or alienating. And what kind of reactions have you had to the work that you're doing?
Well, like particularly the forest one, it's called a kind of violence. But so I've had people be like, why, like, I've had people be entirely alienated by the fact, for instance, that I have this experience with landscapes, and then my reaction, like that my work is a reaction to this this feeling that I have in, for instance, a forest. It's just an example, basically, but still, of course. But I think that it's also good to because, like, with this work, I've exhibited it like twice, and I just think that you're creating this it's like a thing that people can be mirrored in, so they see it and then they have certain reactions to it, because it might be that they're repelled by it because they think, why what's wrong with a forest? Like, I feel much more comfortable in a forest, or whatever. I mean, it's just that. But I think that's interesting because it also makes it makes you even think about it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be confronted with it in that sense.
Yeah.
And it's, as you said, it's not just about like a generational gap. Of course, that's within this entire discussion. It's present. I'm aware of that. But it's also like, I think it's very much interesting what you say about about being complicit in the way we engage with it, and also that I'm like, I don't feel comfortable in certain maybe natural environments, and then by focusing then on virtual spaces, I am complicit maybe to the development that those are the spaces that will occupy more and more of our daily lives, and it's very, very important that, or it's important to be more and more aware of that, because I mean, with this work, I'm as I said, I'm contemplating about my position in digital space, but and that's a very much like it's something that's like circling around yourself in a sense. It's also important because we all have to position ourselves, or well, we strive to position ourselves in a sense, in space, in physical spaces, social spaces, digital space, but still there's always a responsibility, and that's very, very much very important to point out.
Yeah, and it's good to visualize that. Let me share one thing. I'm sure Sean at a certain point is going to stop us, but let me try to see if I can share some of, like, we do, academics write a lot of words, but I actually, in my research, also have some visual stuff. So let me see if I can get that up. And And then I'm hoping, so one of the big projects that I work on is the From Digital Skills to Tangible Outcomes project, which is really around inequalities. And some of the things that we do, and that are sometimes quite confrontational for people, is one of the things that we do is we map people's digital engagement at the neighborhood level in countries, but also in cities. And people are sometimes quite shocked to see how, they basically don't even know their neighbor in terms of the kind of digital world that they live in. So we've done this project in the UK, which is like this map, and this is where I am right now, Westminster, and we can zoom in and we can see, this is all relative, that like I'm in Westminster, where the likelihood of digital exclusion is quite low. But if we go to something here like, and we have, for example, still quite a few, like 6 to 7% of adults is offline. There's about 22% who doesn't even have basic skills, and these are really basic skills, and these are people that live right next to each other. Or if we look at the projects we're doing in LA, here is a map of kind of who has only mobile phones and no access. So we can see that in a big city like Los Angeles, which is becoming like, the new Silicon Valley, we see that in the center of that city, there is 36 to 40% of people who have just a mobile phone that doesn't have an internet connection, right? And these are living right next to these tech entrepreneurs, and again, the physical is in that sense very much connected. Also, the digital spaces are very different also in different physical spaces. And this is the same, we can say, this is Brazil, and Brazil, we have a data problem. We don't have data everywhere. But like, these are speeds of broadband connections, and the work we're doing, for example, in Sao Paulo, shows huge differences in terms of where connections are, who has like the darker red, the speedier the connections. And then if we overlay this into other kinds of identities or other kinds of backgrounds of different kinds of people, we can see that there's a very clear link, and that in some ways, these kind of digital segregations that are starting to exist in terms of who contributes and who creates these digital spaces and who is very much involved and feels comfortable in there, are kind of layered on top of these physical and social and economic segregations. These maps are very, very similar, and we can see that, and it's really interesting for us in our work also to kind of see that, like, to look at some neighborhoods that are like exceptions to the rule, or like physical areas where if you look at the socio-demographic cultural makeup and you look at big data sets, you would expect people not to be very engaged with technology, not to have skills, that actually something is happening there that has made people really engaged. And it can be, it can be an offline thing. It can be something that there's a very strong community association, or there was an event that happened that brought people together and created kind of an online presence to reach out to the world. But it can also be a digital event, right? There is something like the Notting Hill Carnival, right? That will have gotten people to come to that who would normally never engage in that digital space. But I think, these layers of, like, the question about who designs the digital space or what it means to be human in the digital space, it's really hard for me in my work to disconnect that from, what it means to be human in actual physical space, because there's so many overlaps and links. And as humans, I think it's hard for us to disconnect. We can't, this is my digital person and the person who I am and my relationships online, and the physical being that I am and my relationships outside of that digital space. There's so many reflections and overlap. It doesn't mean that it's all, all the same. Of course not, as your work shows. That's not the case either, right? But yeah, and so then, like, if we look at, these kind of things that are reported, like the images are always really important. This is something that's coming up, this is a big study managed by Lloyds Bank in the UK. If we think about, like, the kind of images that we often see of people being in digital spaces or engaging in digital spaces, very particular types of people that, like the kinds of apartments that people live in, or the kinds of, cultural, socioeconomic backgrounds of people who are engaging with that, is also something that people recognize or don't recognize themselves in. And I know we talked about this before, and we had a quite an interesting discussion. So I would like to ask you as well a little bit about how you see your peers or your contemporary work, because we talked about kind of the creative industries and the digital creative industries. and, you know, digital arts, and who are the people who are creating digital arts in that digital industry, and how much do you feel, would you describe yourself as a typical person working in that space, or are there, like, what kind of people work in that space?
Well, I think that there's, I don't know. I mean, honestly, typical. It's a weird thing, but I know that, of course, there's a lot of art happening, engaging with digital space and engaging with this this dichotomy, or not, like, or merging with digital space, which is really, really interesting. And I think that there are artists that are going much further even, or I don't know, working with robotics, or many ways of performance art. And I don't know, I think there are many ways to do that, and I don't know if I'm like typical, or if I don't think that I'm going to any extremes in that sense, but I think it's very much of a thing that has relevance to contemporary life.
That's a little bit about the content of the work. And what do you think about diversity in that workspace, just with my academic hat on, in terms of like the kinds of people who tend to be able to, or tend to contribute to this kind of, you know, this type of creativity?
I think that like there was an exhibition about art and social media and digital practice, like artistic practice about digital space, in a sense, that I saw that wasn't representing one artist that was non-white or not from Europe or North America. And I'm mentioning this because I think that we have this assumption that virtuality or digital space, or like all these tech things, sort of incorporate privilege. But then at the same time, I am very much aware that I am using this because I can, but then I believe that there are parts of the world where artists are using digital space to present themselves because they have to, because I believe that social media and digital space, virtuality, all that gives an opportunity to be seen for people who in the past, especially in the art world, have not been able to be seen in that sense. And I think that the art world, even right now, of course, it's like there are systemic issues, racism, that is like so much rooted in that entire scene, that that we still have this assumption that we are still tying digital space, virtuality, with like industrial nations, but that is not what's happening actually.
Yeah.
Like it's not really,
it's almost like a double layer, right? In a certain way, say the arts world has, you know, always has struggled in itself as the art world itself before digital, and in terms of representing different voices. And then, you know, there was a question in the chat about, you know, curating and digital, digital audience, or the audiences for work. You want to have a broad spectrum. So I think you're battling almost on two fronts, right? Right. One is that culture, or whatever, with a capital C, however, who gets to define that, you know, like cultural capital or symbolic capital, that has often been associated with certain, you know, social and ethnic and, you know, kind of regional groups of individuals. And that's the first barrier. And then the second barrier is that, you know, like the digital spaces, even though there's supposed to be this one big internet that everybody can access, but even if we look at things like, you know, fascinating research on Wikipedia that even the content around, let's say, a country on the African continent, like the majority of the content that is read and that is produced about that particular country is often from people in, not just what we might call the global north, but in very particular places in the global north with very particular backgrounds. And, partly because they have the tools and the skills, but also because they have that kind of cultural, dominance to what is knowledge and what are people, respecting as valuable. And for me, in my work, it's kind of, the real question is how do you both get that to be visible? How do you give people platforms and access to that audience? But then the real hard work starts to actually not just to be visible or to have voice, but also to be heard and to be seen, right? One doesn't automatically follow the other. Just like in digital inequalities, access doesn't automatically follow like use with all these positive outcomes that everybody hopes the digital technologies might have. And I think also the interesting questions is like, to what extent is it also empowering to be able to decide when to leave digital spaces? If you don't feel comfortable in a digital space or you don't want to be there, like telling somebody, but you have to because that's where society is going. That is also a form of, kind of, let's say, exclusion or oppression. Instead of saying, like, why is it that people flock to spaces or create spaces where certain people don't feel comfortable? And, and I think that is this kind of continuous, I guess, with any kind of creativity. Yeah, you create, and then you see who it appeals to. But I think in these digital spaces where we create content that's, that actually gives people access to many opportunities or experiences that they might otherwise not have, it's extremely important, and I really like your link to thinking about actually there is a lot of content and a lot of really interesting stuff produced elsewhere, but somehow, people are not being exposed to it, or it's not being taken up in that kind of mainstream. If we think about even YouTubers, I've got a book coming out in the beginning of next year where I talk a little bit about this, is that, even though there's a lot of, let's say, female vloggers, but in the UK, and some stats show that in the top 50, there's only of a top 50 most viewed vloggers, there's like 7 women, sorry, and of the 7 women, 5 vlog about beauty products, right? And I'm not saying that that's wrong, of course not, but the thing is that we're getting very particular types of content from particular types of people, and a much more diverse content talking about a much more broader range of issues from other types of people. And that's about knowledge generation, that's about whose ideas get valued and things like that. Yeah. So, and I think, I really love how you're creating awareness also about like who you are, and trying to almost like literally unpick in a digital sense, like what are the elements of me, what are the atoms of, of who I am, and what makes me a digital human, a digital space, human in the digital space. Yeah.
I think that is a very perfect point to sort of stop it with another question of, yes, what does make us kind of human in a digital space? It's been very interesting over the talks we've had so far, this red thread kind of going through the talks around awareness and choices. And I don't know if that's sort of heightened by the time that we're in, but it's fascinating to see it connecting within these different realms. So thank you both very, very much for that. Are there any questions from the sort of chat that you'd like to pick up on? I think Gabriella's one you curator you sort of addressed there.
Yeah, and she had to leave now, I see. So I'd be happy to talk to her afterwards as well. There's the philosophical question that if digital trees fall in the forest, if they make sounds. Yeah.
True. Very, that's the question that exists in the real world. So I imagine also as well. But I quite like also, this idea of replacing sensory experience. I think that came out whilst the talk was taking progress anyway as well. But yeah, the aspect of emotion, within the digital space too. I think it's a very sort of pertinent one. But okay then, well, thank you both very much for today.
Thank you.
And there was absolutely fascinating, very thought-provoking stuff. So thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are listening in, we have another talk coming up on Thursday, looking at gender dimensions and the context in which they are produced and also reproduced. So I'm putting the link in the chat now, and if everybody is able to sign up and join us, that'd be fantastic as well. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for organizing. This was great.
Absolute pleasure. Bye.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.